All right. Hello, everybody. So it seemed that some people just wanted to generally ask questions. So this is live streams just for anything. So if you have anything to say, anything at all, anything to ask, comment, whatever, do it in the chat comments. Because here I am in the beautiful hills of wherever with that majestic beast that is my pet. Hey there, viewers. If you're watching, ask anything. This is General Bants. So, yeah. Are we all living in the mind of Brahman? Well, Hyperion, we've talked about that. I actually was eating those, Josh, a little bit ago. They're getting annoying to dig out, so, What do I think about Ilan Omar? Omar, is that the representative that is getting grilled for the Palestine thing, or rather the APEC thing? If so, well, I like her then. Ilana, well, Josh, I don't keep up with the general politics stuff. Is she the APEC one? Or am I thinking about somebody else? Yeah, she shouldn't have apologized. That's a really stupid thing. When you do that, it gives ammunition to your enemies when you shouldn't have. Supposedly they're gonna try to pass legislation to rebuke her or something. That's pretty fucking weird. Why would you pass kind of legislation like that? That's party shit, isn't it? I suppose it's just like symbolic legislation or something. I've heard about that kind of stuff happening before. It's just basically everybody votes on an empty law that has no effect whatsoever about, like, we disagree with that person. Well, whatever, man. Anyways, Hyperion asks, are we living in the mind of Brahman? Maybe. I don't think it's a single mind. It doesn't make sense to me. But could this be the Matrix? Maybe. Don't think so. Don't think we have any reason to believe that yet. Well, at least, if you watch the Matrix movies, like, are we in a computer simulation? I don't think so. Although, we might be in a different kind of simulation that is not computational. No, Josh, God's thoughts are thinking us. That's what we realize with the logic, that thoughts think themselves. Look at him. He loves to come outside whenever we come out here. He just wants to sniff around for about 30 minutes, and then he just wants to go home. And then I obviously want to walk around and do other stuff, and he just kind of looks at me and tries to guilt me to go back home. And he's like, no, I don't want to keep going. For those of you tuning in, general chat questions, ask me anything. Comment anything, by the way. You could say, AW, I think you're fucking retarded. Go ahead, I don't care. He's not that big. I mean, yeah, he's he's about 50 pounds, and He used to be heavier until I started putting him on a diet. The thing is that he actually does not eat very much, uh, and he's been getting about an hour of exercise, of consistent exercise, while I haven't been working. Like when I'm working, during season, I can't do very much of that, so he doesn't get his daily walks. But he's walking about an hour a day of just constant walking, and the lowest he ever got was 45, and he was only eating about a cup of food a day. And so I actually don't know what else I could do to make him lose weight, because besides just doing a lot more exercise, which is strange, for the kind of dog he is. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't taken him to the vet in quite a while. I should. Oh yeah, he's very huggable. I sleep with him. He's a natural blanket warmer. It actually gets like even in the winter, it gets like so warm that he just wants to get away from me and leaves me cold and alone. But yeah, actually, speaking of weight things, I don't know why. Like I was like browsing around YouTube and saw a random Joe Rogan thing, and it was about weight loss, and it was about this doctor he had invited, talking about how it's not about, it's not all about how much you eat or even how much you exercise, because he was talking about how he knew people who came to his clinic, and they did everything that he suggested, and they weren't losing weight, not a lot of it. And so he was talking about how there's a lot more that goes on with the considerations of how people are so heavy due to the natures of metabolism. I don't know about Dr. Sebi, so I can't say anything about them or their thoughts. But anyways, maybe Balboa Jr. is so big because of a bad diet. But I'll have to look into that a lot more. That's definitely true that the kinds of things you eat definitely sometimes mess with your digestive system, with your metabolism. Some people just, and some animals just can't eat certain things because they don't metabolize them well. Either transforms it into too much fat, or their body's the kind that is not very good at breaking down those kinds of fat cells, because there's different fats that you have in your body and all this other jazz. So who knows? All right, for those of you tuning in, ask me anything, tell me anything. If I have anything to say, I'll respond. So Jason Bourne, I don't know if you can say something about Dr. Sebi. Maybe I can say something else about it. Was I going to talk about the rest of the logic? I'll do some other videos later on. It's hard to talk about the logic because it's just weird. There has to be a lot of diagramming. Diagrams help a lot, actually, though they're misleading. And the second chapter is actually one that is actually pretty good to diagram, because it's very reflexive. It's confusing to a certain extent. And so just talking about that one doesn't really help much. But I suppose, if you've read the chapter, talking about it, sure, if you're following along, would work. Doctor who died proved in court he cured cancer and HIV. I don't doubt it. There's a lot of things with outside of the orthodoxy which have to do with curing cancer and HIV. Well, HIV, I don't know, though I've heard about those things, but cancers, definitely. There's a lot of weird shit that helps you with cancers, but change your diet, change, like there are stuff like, what is it? Paul Stamets discovered that turkey-tailed mushrooms, which grow all over the place in California, by the way, are highly anti-carcinogenic. And then if you make them into a tea, it definitely cures some cancers. He gave it to his old mother of his, who had breast cancer and didn't want to go through chemo. She was really old, and she's like, well, if I'm gonna die, I'm not gonna bother, go into that whole entire pain and discomfort of chemotherapy or surgeries. And so she just drank turkey tail mushroom teas, and it cured her cancer. Pretty good. So I don't doubt that plenty of these others, alternative medicine doctors, for example, do have things that they've found that help with certain cancers. Although there's no such thing as curing cancer, by the way, because there is no such thing as cancer as such. There are cancers, and they don't all work the same, and they're not about the same things. What is it? Another thing, like the number one cause of cancer, for example, is stress. What is it? Gabor Mate from Canada has a lot of work that he's done on that, showing that it's not just cancer, by the way. There are a lot of diseases which are related to very specific kinds of stress. And in order to cure those kinds of things, you don't just apply medicine. You don't just do a medical operation. You actually have to change people's way of life. And people's general problem today is capitalism. Yeah, I might look him up. I mean, I'm not terribly interested in these kinds of things, honestly. Most of the time they just piss me off, so I don't bother going and searching around for them. But sure, yeah, if they come up, I'll look into it. Any questions? Any other things? Otherwise, let's see. Well, somebody asked you about maybe continue logic. Sure, let me ramble on about the logic until somebody else says anything interesting. Existence, which is the second chapter of the science of logic, is interesting because there's a couple of movements which are just absolute genius. And everybody's kind of like, oh, Hegel was a genius, obviously, but you don't realize how genius a lot of this stuff is. So existence begins with being and nothing in immediate unity. The unity is, the infinite movement. Bam, there's a recursion. The unity is. We know now that whenever we have being, we also have nothing. So because the unity of existence is, you now have it doubled. So you have the being of being and nothing, and the nothing of being and nothing. And that then leads you immediately towards the shifts towards determinacy from existence, which are equivalences, by the way. Existence is the unity of being and nothing. That is also at once determinacy as such. That is also at once quality as such. And with the shift upwards in that doubling, where you now have the existence of existence, let's say, or the determinacy of determinacy, you have quality, and therefore you have reality as the being of quality, and you have negation as the non-being of quality. And then Hegel says, by the way, this has a reflexive movement back up again. You go from the moments of quality up to the transcendence, in which you have the qualities be, and therefore you now have the two qualities, which are reality and negation. And so those are terms that are meant in about two ways. They have two ontological levels. And once you have a qualitative being, that's something. And the interesting thing about qualitative being is that qualitative being is literally the structure of existence once again, and therefore you have existence. And Hegel himself tells you this, by the way, but I've never seen anybody else mention this because it's just a peculiar way to say it. It's a peculiar thing to notice, and he immediately then shifts and says, by the way, this is a being in itself. But then he goes around, continues, just says it off the hand, like nothing else. And then continues to do a derivation through another way about being in itself and being for other. But the fact that it is that if you do the whole repetition of existence, the fact that existence is within its own structure, it is in itself. So existence is in itself. It is in itself, being in itself. Boom, something. It's awesome. It's really great. It's also an autistic point, but I love autistic points. Proxy. Yeah. Hey again, Cactus. Look this stuff. No, I'm not going to explain autism. You have anything to say, Josh? Here's the dog. He's just walking around. See, it's a really nice place here. There's like rabbits all over the place. Maybe snakes, probably snakes. So I shouldn't actually I should actually let him just walk around like nothing. Although I haven't seen any snakes, and it's not definitely haven't heard anything like rattlesnakes around here. But I know that there's rattlesnakes around Fresno and all this other jazz. Just look at him. He just... What are you doing? For those of you tuning in, ask any questions, make any comments, whatever. I suppose if I'm going to ramble, let's ramble about something somewhat interesting. I made that video about Bernie and reparations, and I made the second video. Hey Jebusite, ask something, whatever. I made that video about Bernie and reparations, Spinoza or Hegel. Do we have to choose one or the other? I don't think so. I find that people who make those distinctions tend to not comprehend Hegel very well. Because with Hegel, it's always kind of like bowls, why not? There's always a way to intake any other philosopher into it. Okay, Josh asks, what does Hegel have to say about our senses? They're especially important when it comes to art, but besides that, what Hegel has to say about senses is mostly in the phenomenology, both in the phenomenology of spirit as well as the phenomenology within the logic. And the phenomenology of spirit within the logic, or rather within the encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences, is not exactly the same as the phenomenology of spirit, the book. And in the one in the encyclopedia, what you get is actually more of a sort of evolutionary sense of like the logical place the senses have in the entire living apparatus, as well as the basic modes of cognition, perception, sense certainty, perception, understanding are the basic modes of cognition for all living beings. So they're required for cognition, for living in the world. Nietzsche and Hegel because I haven't read much Nietzsche. Although I've read a bit of what was it, Twilight of the Idols. Maybe it was well, it probably was a bad translation because I just didn't like it. That translation was so bad and obtuse, in my opinion. And yet everybody, praises Nietzsche's writing styles and aphorisms, and I thought that particular translation just didn't really go well. It doesn't really strike you that that's the case. But I think Nietzsche's serious. I think he's an honest philosopher. Particularly, I think the most generally philosophically important parts of it are his attacks on dogmatism regarding truth. That we generally, as well as in the philosophical community, have an unwarranted conception of these things. Proxy, thoughts on Hegel's aesthetics? Well, I like him. What else is there to say? I have an entire book on an anthology of aesthetics from all the way from from Plato up to more modern stuff. And I'm pretty sure all those other people have something very good and valid to say about aesthetics. I just don't know where that book went. It cost me $30 fucking, and I have no idea where it went. So you're thinking Deleuze had premature evaluation of Hegel? Yes. I can respect Deleuze. I don't think he was an idiot. I'm not going to say, oh, he just, wasn't a good thinker. He doesn't understand difference. I think Deleuze understood difference. I just think Deleuze didn't understand what Hegel thought about difference. Because otherwise, he couldn't say at least half the shit he says. Did Hegel consummate Western metaphysics? Depends on what you mean by that. Really depends on what you mean by that. If you're talking about did Hegel finally achieve the project of metaphysics, which was to know the general foundational structure of the world, I'd say if he didn't consummate it, he got pretty damn close. Except for Hegel, metaphysics is not really that important. Metaphysics is only the first two sections of the science of logic, and the rest of the philosophy is real philosophy. The philosophy of nature is a real philosophy, and then all the other stuff in spirit is real philosophy. It's philosophy about real things. Does logic equal metaphysics? No. Logic does not equal metaphysics, because the concept is the explicit logical apparatus, and it's beyond metaphysics. It's not about being or essence. It's about logic itself, the cognition. By the way, Ken Folds is a kind of a interesting and funny guy. Check him out. He has a website too. He considers himself a Jedi master. If you actually read through his stuff, at first it strikes you like, what the fuck? And then you actually slow down, and if you know your Hegelianism, you realize that this is just Hegelianism with Star Wars lingo. And it's funny, and he actually teaches a class on that. He actually teaches, I don't know, I forget where it is that he teaches, but he actually teaches a class on Jedi philosophy. But it's actually all Hegelianism. What do you think about the relationship of mind and body? Well, obviously the mind is not indifferent to the brain, and the brain is not indifferent to the mind. suppose the main question of that is that people want to know, does consciousness, does mind originate in the brain? And that's something different because, okay, let's see. We know that we have compartments in our mind that are, well, not mind, our brain, that do specific things. We have the linguistic centers, we have the empathic centers, we have the emotional centers, we have a sort of a, mathematical calculative center, we have the artistic or the sense centers of that intuition. And if you get rid of any of those parts or damage them, you can't do certain forms of cognition. And so, our conscious mind is not indifferent to the operations of our brain. The question then is, though, this is kind of mostly what is it? You mostly hear this in the psychedelic community and the spiritual, like shaman people, like it's the spiritual shaman stuff. The idea that consciousness may not originate in the brain, that the brain may actually just be a receiver, not or a transmitter. And whether that is or is not the case is still another question scientifically, I think. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with that. Definitely our conscious embodied general normal awareness is definitely mediated by our brains, and if you damage the brain, you're gonna damage the manifestation of the mind. Doesn't Hegel ontologize logic following Aristotle and Kant? Depends on what you mean by that. For example, the ontology of immediacy is being and nothing. But if you understand what that is, you also understand that ways of being, or ways of doing, or ways of thinking, if that's what you mean by ontologizing logic, well, sure, okay. But if you mean that you ontologize our ways of thinking, then no, that's not really it. Heidegger said Hegel consummated Western metaphysics into logic because Western metaphysics never asked the question of being. I think Heidegger is full of shit on that. Let me get out of the wind then. Sorry. So, do I need to repeat what I said about the whole ontology and logic? Okay, so if by ontologizing logic you're talking about ontologizing our ways of thinking, then Hegel does not ontologize logic. If by ontologizing logic you mean that, say something like the logic of immediacy, which is being and nothing, which is also a semantic logic, really, about what we can mean by that, what we can even comprehend, that is tied both with if what we comprehend by what is immediate is real, is really out there, it exists, is that exactly what we're talking about? Hegel said, well, yeah, if that's what you mean by ontologizing logic, sure. Hegel ontologizes logic, but it's also the case that, in that sense, why wouldn't you? I mean, how couldn't you, really? If you have a logic that has nothing to do with being, if you have a logic that has nothing to do with being, what the hell are you talking about then? It's like what formal logic is pointless in that sense because, you're doing stuff that has no real importance. You're working with just simple formalizations where things can be equally false or true, and all logic cares about is validity. whereas ontological logic cares about truth. So are you actually talking about something real? Are you not? And I like that way more than just formal logic. So there. I personally believe Deleuze could beat up Hegel, could beat Hegel up easily. You know what? I doubt it. Have you seen Hegel? Like read about Hegel. Hegel is a fucking Chad. Like Jesus Christ. Not only that, Hegel was an unbelievable normie. Like unbelievable normie. Like he was an autist, but like you read about like how people went and met him and like just talked with him, and people said like he could just talk to you about anything, and like he was very likable at a party. Wish I could be like that, but I can't. Whereas you look at someone like Deleuze, and Deleuze was just kind of weird, as far as I could tell. If it's just about beating people up, yeah, I still think Hegel could beat him up. Deleuze's nails? Nah, I don't think the nails would do very much. Anyway, somebody mentioned that Heidegger claims that Western metaphysics never asks the question of being. I think that's bullshit, and I'm gonna say that's bullshit because I know this guy who is an unbelievable. Well, let's just say he's an obsessive kind of guy. His name is Daniel Pascal Zorn, and if he says that Heidegger is full of shit, I'm gonna believe that Heidegger is full of shit on that one. He actually made a post once on Facebook, and he's like, somebody came into one of the Hegel study groups and was saying like, well, Heidegger proved Hegel wrong. And Zorn is just this kind of guy who's like really combative, and he just came in and made this giant rant post about he's like, one, this is a Hegel study group, so why are you fucking talking about Heidegger? And two, he's like, Heidegger's full of shit, about this whole thing about nobody asked the question of being, and nobody made the ontic difference. And he starts rattling off about all these other philosophers. He's like, how can you that they're not asking the question of being? And it was funny. And ever since then, I respect Heidegger. I read a little bit of his introduction to metaphysics, and I thought it was pretty good actually. Bit rambly, but it's kind of good rambling. Heidegger would certainly contest the throne of philosophy. I don't think so. I don't think so. If you were banned by Zorn, you probably deserved it. Why don't I think that Heidegger really contests the throne of philosophy? Because he wasn't systematic. I mean, like, he was good at what he did. But, even Heidegger moved past the whole thing of being and time. I don't know anything about Heidegger's fundamental ontology. I'm talking out of secondary opinions here. So this is a tertiary opinion. And so I'm talking out of my ass. But I do know this one guy who used to be very into Heidegger, and he's now a Hegelian. Have some disagreements with him. Being in time, systematic, yeah, early Heidegger, but I mean, look at later Heidegger. People make that big difference. As a matter of fact, Zorn posted something recently, about a couple days ago, about how he's so tired of people still being stuck on being in time, as if like Heidegger beyond that doesn't exist. And he says, He was saying something about how the scholarship is like lagging so far behind that and that people are still stuck with being in time because the later Heidegger is not systematic and is far more deeply philosophical, in his opinion, than the early Heidegger. And so people don't want to move beyond being in time because it's too hard and it destroys that whole project of being in time. So I don't know. I don't know either about the being in time Heidegger or the middle Heidegger or the later Heidegger. I'm not saying Heidegger is like not a good or great philosopher. It seems to me he definitely is. I'm just saying I don't think he vies for the throne of philosophy in general. I mean, he is no Plato. He is no Aristotle. He's no Kant. I mean, he's not of that same degree, I think. Revolutionary, but not revolutionary enough. Hegel would tag Hölderlin. He would kick everyone's ass, and then he'd forget about it. Heidegger's the only one who interpreted Aristotle correctly. I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, that'd be like saying that Hegel interpreted any other philosopher correctly. And I don't buy that, by the way. Don't buy it really one bit. Because I think Hegel misinterpreted quite a lot of the other people. Have I read Heidegger? I've read parts of the Introduction to Metaphysics. I've read an essay of his on propositional propositional and material truth, and it was a really good essay. Really good. But no, I haven't read Being in Time, and honestly, I'm not about to right now. There's a lot of other people that I would rather read first, which I find far more interesting. Although, like I said, Zorn has issues on that, and one of them was precisely that he said that he hates Heidegger's reading of Aristotle because he thinks he misreads them a lot. And he says, well, everybody misreads, and then he goes on this rant about how everybody who's a great philosopher misreads everybody else before them, and claims that they're the first ones to come up with some genius new distinction which was always already there, but it wasn't yet popularized. Micropolitics is sitting on this green hill. Let's assume that I'm supporting Chad African's whole idea that Pico is going to happen and we're going to all be thrown back to the Stone Age. So I'm just getting acclimated to that way of life. And just to comment a bit about Zorn, by the way. Zorn is this guy who, philosopher in Germany, German philosopher, who is mainly interested in what he calls reflexive logic, and he likes to read people through themselves. He doesn't like to read them through anybody else. And so he really gets pissed off at anybody who comes in with an external point of view and tries to read, say, Hegel according to Spinoza, or Plato according to Hegel, or Aristotle according to Heidegger. He hates that. He hates that a ton. And actually, I'm in agreement with that sentiment. That if you're going to read somebody, read them through themselves and don't read them through anybody else. It's like reading a Hegel through Deleuze or something. Why would you do that? Read Deleuze for Deleuze, and if Deleuze is talking about something about Hegel or anybody else, look at the structure of what he's saying, but don't worry too much about was he right about Hegel? Who cares? I don't care. I care about the actual content, regardless of the form. Especially when the form is rather irrelevant in that sense. It's not really about content forms. The only form and content that matter is the immanent content form. Beyond that, if Deleuze, says Hegel says this, but Hegel doesn't actually say that, then all that matters there is not whether Hegel did or did not say that, but rather just simply whether what Deleuze is talking about as a content form makes sense. Uh, Also, I don't think that the dialectic is some method of cognition that we have to learn. It's rather something that we always do. The difficulty is making explicit to our active mind. True. Yes. When Hegel says, and other people say, like Marxists, are like, well, dialectics is just the reality, the reality of our thought. Yeah, that's true. Actually, you see that all the way from Plato, and people like that. It is just the way you think. You don't have to know about the logic of being and nothing, the logic of immediacy, to actually think immediately. It's that simple. The only thing that's special about Hegel's dialectic is that it's absolute, that it focuses on that absolute nature. So if you want to engage in Hegelian dialectic, then yes, you actually do have to learn that, because you really have to come to grips with purifying that way of thinking. Beyond that, of course, you always think dialectically, whether you realize it or not. Boy, it's getting a bit chilly. Hopefully that gets me out of the wind and doesn't get the wind to the microphone. Let me know about that. Efficient cause is a made-up concept in Aristotle. Aristotle never mentioned efficient cause. I think that's true, isn't it? That was later another term that was brought up, but it wasn't one of the original causes. It's not only thinking, but also the accumulation of content. I don't know what you mean. I have something that comes to mind that may be or may not be what you're talking about. Somebody says, I wish there was a Hegel through Deleuze. I guarantee you there probably is. And I'm not even joking. Just look around on LibGen. I've seen quite a few books that try to do these comparative readings of Hegel and Deleuze. Trying to bring them together, showing that they're not actually as divergent as people seem to think. And I've seen comments like that a few times, but I'm not really so interested in the question. To learn about Deleuze, I just want to learn about Deleuze himself. I don't really want to think about the relationship of Deleuze and Hegel. That comes after. I'm really weird with that obsession of mine, that if I want to read somebody, I really do want to read them for themselves, and I don't want to be reading them through anybody else or in relation to anybody else. Because when you try to read somebody and you're constantly translating their concepts into another language, you're not exactly fully immersing yourself in that new way of thought, and that really muddies the water of your own comprehension. Somebody's accusing Hyperion of blaspheming Hölderlin. I don't think so, man. Hyperion's a patrician of literature, music, film. If anybody understands Hölderlin, Hyperion is one of those people. Any other questions? Or my favorite other things other than Hegel. The little bit about I know about Kant. I love Kant. I have to read the Critique of Pure Reason at some point. I want to. It's just I want to give him like his due as a thinker. And so I want to give him the treatment that I give Hegel, and I want to give anybody else that I read. Spinoza, I like Spinoza. I've read part of the Ethics, but I mostly read I think the Tractatus Politico Philosophicus or something in another essay, and they were good. I like the implications of Spinoza quite a lot. There are some things which I caught on for myself, which were interesting. Um, Other people I like Plato. Plato is really, really good. And I actually appreciate him more now than I did when I first read him for my philosophy classes. Uh, Marx, I love Marx. Despite all the, if you look at my other channel, Left of Wreckage, like most of it is shitting on Marx and Marxists quite a bit. But that's kind of a corrective phase that I went through, in which it was kind of me toning down the praise that Marx gets from leftists, and going through it to show that it's not as great as people think. Nonetheless, I think Marx was a really great thinker in the spheres where he kept on. Who else? Aristotle. I like Aristotle, and I need to read Aristotle quite a lot more. Actually, Chad African makes his critiques of modern society and capitalism and other philosophers based on Aristotelian understandings and concepts. And so I need to learn my Aristotle to be in dialogue with Chad about our differences and perhaps misunderstandings. Other people, maybe Neoplatonics. I like Neoplatonics. Depends on which ones I may have time for. There's something about mystical philosophies that I do like. There's something important, and as a matter of fact, it just shows you the extent to what do we even consider philosophy. And I think that what we consider philosophy is, for the great philosophers, you notice that they're actually quite broad. Even Heidegger took philosophy to be more than just what so-called philosophers wrote. Mystics can be philosophers. People who generally do not have an academic standing as philosophers are philosophers. I consider William Blake to be a philosopher, frankly. Just as Hegel considered Jakob Böhme to be a philosopher. You could say that Hermes Trismegistus, from the Emerald Tablets and all these other things, these are philosophies. And I think that such a thing is not crazy to say at all. They're not very explicit philosophies, but there's deeply philosophical content in those kinds of things. And so, depending on how broad you want to be, a lot of things can or cannot. Other people, well, I've been reading Schelling, right? So Schelling is somebody who I definitely respect. Wittgenstein, holy shit, I love Wittgenstein. Particularly the philosophical investigations of Wittgenstein. I think, and if you're asking me who influenced me the most, Marx, Wittgenstein, Kant, Hegel, and for various reasons, not to the same degrees and not on the same things. Wittgenstein is a big reason for part of why I love Hegel, actually, where Wittgenstein was just all about cutting through bullshit. Get rid of the illusions of language. And I feel that Hegel does that pretty damn well. It's part of why I like it. Marx is also somebody who, was for cutting through the illusions of, so-called science, the way that we comprehend, things like social sciences and even material sciences. And Marx actually edges quite close to pragmatism, more so than he edges towards Hegelianism. If you look beyond capital, And if you look at the underlying other commitments behind capital and beyond capital, I think Hegel doesn't give me enough process philosophy brain. Actually, I think the opposite. I think when I first learned about process philosophy, Hegel is the first one that immediately caught my mind as like, this is a process philosophy with no question. You look at, say, something like Whitehead, and I'm not a fan of Whitehead, by the way, but it's not because of Whitehead himself. It's more that I knew this guy who was into Whitehead for a while, and he was so fucking annoying, and we literally would get into screaming matches on on our philosophy chats. I have one recorded. I think I still have it. I might upload it one day. He would probably be pissed off, but it was funny. It was very funny. But he gave me a distaste for Whitehead, but not Whitehead himself. You know, I'm still open to reading Whitehead. I still have books, a couple books, uh, showing a connection between Whitehead and Hegel. Because I don't think Whitehead was stupid. I think Whitehead was genuinely a good philosopher. I don't like his style, though. God, no, I don't like his style. The way he writes, the terms he uses, I don't like it. Uh, Anthropocentric is not the right word. I don't know what it would be. This appeal to experience is not something I like. He doesn't have the language to think about vectors and shit. Actually, yes, he does. Yes, he does. I can tell you because I've been doing some mathematical thinking about which has things about vectors and whatnot, and Hegel's very useful. Maybe the terms are not to your pleasing, but I guarantee you he is very process oriented. I mean, Hegel, it's all about becoming. Adam Tito, I like Kybalion, but not the other Hermetic stuff. You know what I actually want to read is the alchemical stuff. But I don't know who to read about that. I suppose I should just read like secondary literature. What was it? Hyperion, Josh, I, and a couple other friends, we've read Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. Really good book. You know, if you're interested, read that book. Holy shit, Hyperion. Synchronicity right there. We say the same thing about the same time. There's another one I want to read. It's by someone else, but it's who inspired McGee to write his book, which is about Bruno and the Hermetic tradition. Giordano Bruno. Bruno is... Oh my god. Quit being bad. Shh. Quit being bad. Thus the philosophical stone that changes the substances. Theodore, you ever heard of the two-eye stone? Because if you haven't, that might be one form of the philosopher's stone, which is not actually philosophical. It's the two-eye stone is an Atlantean myth. I'm not going to say much more about that. You can look it up. God, it's getting a bit windy. What are you getting mad about? Do I have Telegram? No. If that's an app, never heard of it. I have Twitter, I have Facebook, I have Instagram. If you need to contact me, I have email. Contact me those ways. I have a Skype as well, but you know, unless like you specifically want to like video chat or something, not handing that out. Well, nobody our age uses Skype, but a lot of older people still do, actually. Because actually, that's how I was in contact with this professor from in Georgia, and he was asking me about Hegel a couple months ago, and so I actually did a couple readings with him through the Phenomenology of Spirit, the first two chapters, showing him how the logic works, and it was a pretty interesting time. No, Winfield wouldn't. Why would Winfield be talking to me about like asking me for Hegel help? Gaston Bachelard. Bachelard. Name sounds familiar. But I definitely have, if I've read about them, I haven't read them directly. Can't say I fully recall why that name reminds me. What is the Hegelian God? It's the absolute. I actually wanted to make a video specifically about that. Okay, like there's three senses of the Hegelian God that could be comprehended. One of them is the process. That God is the process of the universal. You know, and if you understand Hegelian logic, you know that the universal is that movement of infinity. That's one sense of God, as that process of self-determination. The other sense of God is God as the completed set of determinations which that process has generated, both empirical as well as ontological. So Hegel takes a more interest in the ontological side, and I agree with him because that's the one that you can actually really talk about. The empirical side is, you know, always going to have an infinite manifestations. The question is, what kind of manifestations are there? And those kinds of manifestations seem to me like they would be finite, but at the same time, there is some possibility that they're not. There may be levels that go higher and higher. Another one is, and so there's that sense in which, you know, this culmination of God as the full determinations of the world and cognition, you know, culminate within us, individuals who become aware of this entire system and, you know, develop it within our minds and, you know, fully become aware of ourselves. And that's one sense of God in society, that God is this entire process which produces individuals that can do this. And then there's a third sense where God is the kind of God that you would normally be aware of. You know, you know, and this is a possibility only under certain assumptions about the possibilities of existence and science. That is, that supposing that there was a civilization that got advanced enough that could live basically as long as they wanted to, and that wanted to keep something, say, like individuality, like real individuality, and not become a hive mind, or become, you know, some fucking like artificial construct like the Matrix. If there was a society that could do that and wanted to do that, what they would possibly do is actually basically create some kind of either simulation or some other manner in which individuals could live. These individuals who would be immortal, by the nature of their scientific mastery, could just live through a hell of a lot of lives, so to say, of intuitive experience, as well as intellectual experience. And at a certain point, each individual would concretize the entire possibility of ranges of possible experiences for a spiritual being, a cognitive, aware, social being of sorts. And so at the end of, say, their learning process, if you could call this a learning process, these beings would basically, in themselves, be both a concretization of the real totality of determinations at an intuitive level, and not just at a social level, like where Hegel leaves it. And those individuals would basically be what we normally now consider God. Not just as a, oh, well, it's just a logical concept of God. No, that would be a real God. You know, maybe they can achieve intellectual intuition. Yeah, Hyperion makes a good point. That'd be a God, not the God. The God is a universal which exists through all things. It is the thing that manifests all particulars. For if you want to think about, so if you want to think about just capital G God, absolute God, yes, that God is only this totality of the entire universe. If you want to call it the universe, as a universe which includes everything, including spiritual minds which know the universe, and maybe might come to intellectual intuition, and maybe their thoughts become things. But if you want to talk about a God that exists, or God that exists, what you do is you got to talk about a God and not the God. And being honest here, I think those kind of gods exist. Let's put it that way. Whether we have come into contact with such things is a whole other question. Hey Dan, probably busy at work, aren't you? For those of you tuning in, ask anything, comment anything. I'm basically doing fuck all. Just answering and commenting on anything you want. Actually, if nobody's going to comment on anything, I suppose I should comment on something of my own interest. So I made that Bernie and reparations video. Get over here and read Ulysses. Okay, well, we'll read it once I get back home. So I made that Bernie and reparations video. And people just don't comprehend. It just shows you that a lot of people just trawl the internet and look for shit to either just immediately affirm what they want, or shit that they think doesn't affirm what they want, and they immediately make responses based on not having listened to anything that you fucking say in a video. And it's really, really annoying. It didn't just happen with that Bernie video, reparations video. It also happened with the stupid Jordan Peterson video, where one guy came in and says like, well, how can you say these things? And I'm like, did you even listen to what the fuck I said? And clearly he didn't. And I said something in response to him, and then he said something in response to me, and I'm like, well, all those things are not things that I even care about. And he's like, well, you're being intellectually dishonest. And how's that intellectual dishonesty? If I tell you that the things that you're bringing up are not things that I'm even interested in, that's not what I'm asking. That's really annoying. That's super annoying. Like, Adam Tito, nowadays I often think about the concept of synthetical theism, which should be the logical consequence, dialectically speaking, of theism atheism sequence. Um, sure, maybe you can call it that. I don't see why, honestly, because Hegel's theism basically is that. Hegel's theism is not about Big Daddy God in the sky. We are God. That's it. Uh, so, it is an atheism towards an external God, and it is theism in which you accept that there is an absolute. And Hegel has an interesting sense of the meaning of God, and he says, well, look, everybody believes in God. There's literally nobody who doesn't. If you believe in an absolute, and it's not a conscious belief, by the way, everybody acts on an absolute, and that is true. Everybody acts and conceives in an absolute. Well, that's your God. You know, uh, if all you care about in life is money, that's your God. If all you care about in life is fame, that's your God. If all you care about your life is, Jesus, that's your God. If when push comes to shove, you know, you were all pious and all these other things in other situations, but now, it's all about, well, sorry, it's all about me. Uh, we know where your God lies, who your God really is. Those things for which you're willing to truly fight and die for, that's your God. Uh, that way in which you think about everything, consciously or unconsciously, that's your God. The problem with that, no problem with that, but it's already not the Hegelian God. Well, how would it be the Hegelian God? Uh, if you can give us some quick outline about what you think God would be, that's different to just the absolute. I like to see it. Uh, Dan says if you don't know his entire catalog, they'll pin the intellectual dishonesty on you no matter what. Yeah, they do. Uh, I mean, I don't care. I just got mad at that one person because they just came in like a fucking idiot and, recusing me of things. And I'm like, I don't even care, man. Like, all I ask is, like, if you think that there's something there, point me towards where you think, and I don't care what you think. I don't think what my opinion is. I don't care what anybody's opinion is. I'll look into it and I'll see if there's anything. Uh, Hyperion says, I agree with Zizek about being an Nietzschean theist insofar as we must rupture the structures that shape and skew our ideologies in order to live as fully human. There is nothing pulling the strings in our life, so now we as humans must face the responsibility of our actions and inactions. Yeah, it's about self-determination. It's also the case that, theism and atheism has nothing to do with religion, really. Um, you know, uh, though we can talk about the senses of religious thinking, which goes beyond what we normally call religion, because religious thinking really pervades everywhere. It pervades both in science, it pervades in the secular, pervades in the selfish, it pervades in the obsessively moral. Uh, so religious thinking. And a good example is my good friend Lazul here. He doesn't think himself religious, but he is oh so religious. Him and his nihilism. For anybody tuning in, ask questions, ask anything, comment anything. The explanation of the God as the absolute towards which our mind is already directed, the loved one in the mind of the lover, for example. But how is that Hegelian absolute? It's not the Hegelian absolute. If that's what you mean, okay. The meaning of God is whatever you treat as absolute, whether it is the intelligible absolute is a whole other thing. Because, for example, you can be like Lazul here, who believes that the finite is the infinite, and I've tried to discuss with him many times about why that's not the case. If you really believe that, that's not coherent. That's not conceptually intelligible, actually. Nonetheless, you can live your life as an egoist and selfish and all these other things and pretend that this is absolute, and you will act based upon that everywhere and anywhere. It's like having the Kantian rule. That's an absolute. And so, yeah, the meaning of the absolute there is not in any conceptual sense. It's just talking about the attitude of the absolute. I am also not religious and not an atheist, thus the synthetical theism. Yeah, I suppose, like I said, like you can call it that. It doesn't really matter to me. Like what I said in my last video, walking around, which was that the term names don't matter. It's the content, and if the content is the same, the term names are rather irrelevant. Of course, it'd be better if we use the same term names because it makes communication a lot easier. Other than that, who was it? Actually, this reminds me. Hyperion, remember when Eggo Waffles was trying to start up his new religion? What was it that he called it? Apotheism. He too had this sense of, this religion, not religion, but this theism with atheism, and he called it apotheism. And so you're not the only one who has this idea of like, well, they want to come up with some kind of new term for thinking this way. Jebusite says, Hegel says in the preface, the science of logic, which constitutes metaphysics proper or purely speculative philosophy, has hitherto still been much neglected. Depends on what you mean by metaphysics, because I can tell you Hegel does not mean by metaphysics what you normally mean by metaphysics. There's only one sense in which it actually does, because there's plenty of other places where you will see that Hegel mentions metaphysics, and it is not what you think. For example, Hegel will say that ontology as such is metaphysics, regardless. So, if you're talking about nature, you're talking about metaphysics. That's it. If you're talking about, say, capital, Marx's Capital, that is the metaphysics of capitalism. That's it. And so metaphysics ceases to be this grand thing about pure being or something like that. It's just about the truth of things. It's about the eternal categories. Aloha to you too. Jefferson's Bible, yeah, he cut out all the miracles. He basically cut out all the cool shit from the Bible. Why would you do that? You know, why would you do that? You cut out all the cool shit that's the Bible's worth reading about, and just leave the boring crap, the boring everyday Kantianism of Jesus. Ah. It's gonna take a sweet time. Hey there, Edgar Marco. It's been a long time. You want to know about self-determination? Yeah, let me talk about that. In a Hegelian manner, like you can't talk about self-determination without infinity. That's just kind of the difficulty about it. I mean, there's a way to talk. It can be talked about in normal terms, but to understand the Hegelian manner of it, you have to understand the infinite. And I'm running out of battery, so I'm rushing to my car right now to get my charger, because I do have a charger. Self-determination. I mean, I have that one video. Just basic gist of it. Okay, if you want to be free, the normal conception of freedom is that you're not being coerced, determined from the outside. And so, what does that? If you want to be absolutely free, what does that require? Well, self-determination, full self-determination, and you are free insofar as you manage self-determination. And this goes against the normal ideas of freedom, because in the normal ideas of freedom, the issue is about determinism versus indeterminism. But Hegel, along with other German idealists, don't do that because it doesn't make sense. You can't conceive freedom through that issue of determinism versus indeterminism, because indeterminism will destroy the possibility of freedom even worse than determinism does. The answer then is to have an internal determination, which is self-determination. And give me a second. Okay, there we go. I'll wait for him to just get here. Poor little guy just outpaced him. Oh, God. So anyways, inner determination is the issue. And that's going to work is you're going to have a whole which generates its parts, while those parts are different from the whole and yet nonetheless are not in opposition to it. I mean, just think about an organism. An organism self-develops. I should have carried him like a baby. I do that way too much. I mean, I'm amazed I can even do it. He's like 50 pounds. I do it all the time. Gotta carry him up the bed and down the bed, and he's a demanding child. You know, he's like always coming back and forth. Is he losing weight? Yeah, but there's a certain point at which he hasn't lost weight beyond that, even though I keep giving him walks, and he doesn't eat that much. Appearance says what the empirical form of freedom will be is contingent. People have different desires at different times, but we want to use reason to maximum potential, which is self-determination. He quotes, I must find a way for people to be free without them becoming foolish, so that the freedom will make them noble. How do I do this? That is the question. Quote from John Cage. Yeah, that's part of the big issue with freedom in general. Uh, in order for freedom to make sense, you literally have to begin unfree, and you only become free in the realization of your own unfreedom. At which point, you then have kind of choices of do you accept what you already are given, or do you go with this other determination? And the choice is really between reason and unreason. Uh, and that's it. And whether you choose reason or unreason uh, is independent of reason. uh, Independent of reason in the sense that it's not about the reason in your mind, it's about the reason of your, what would it be called? Well, your emotions, your intuitions. Because, for example, our good friend Laz here, uh, regardless of how many times we keep arguing with him about how his nihilism, egotism doesn't really make sense, or egoism as he calls it, uh, he still doesn't seem to care. So rational debate is not what's going to convince him about it. Even though, Hyperion and I, we stand by the whole idea that, you can't be free if you're just like letting your emotions lead you. If you just go do things because it's cool, for example. We talk about good and evil, and he says, well, why wouldn't I do evil? What if evil is like cool? And we're like, well, why would you do that if you're reasonable? Well, maybe you don't care about reason, and that's just the fact. Uh, you know, uh, if you were free, if you wanted to be really free, we think that you would just have to be rational. Uh, and it would be rational towards obviously your own personal goals, your own personal determinations, which you don't necessarily choose, by the way. Uh, yeah, Josh says you can't ignore emotions. You have to redirect your emotions to reason. Yeah, you do. I mean, that's part of what virtue comes into. Say Aristotle's virtue ethics. Um, Hegel doesn't mention it much, if at all. I actually never see him mention it, but I'm sure this is actually part of his philosophy, right? In ethical life, that you need to have a direction of intuitions, of emotions, of individual desires in a way that they serve the greater whole, so that they're not destructive. So, we all have our individual natural characters. Some of us are more outgoing, some of us are more selfish, some of us are more empathetic, blah, blah, blah. Regardless of those things, we can all reason. And the ideal would be that we would find some way to see ourselves within the greater whole, regardless of our own personal, uh, you know, emotional reasons for why we do things. So, maybe you could have someone selfish who nonetheless is of very great yeah, social capacity, and uses it properly, even if it is for the wrong reasons. So, I'm not of the opinion of quite a lot of leftists who simply believe that if we just change society to communism, suddenly everybody will just be this wonderful free flower, just fully self-realizing and developing themselves, to wonderful capacities. Um, Chad made a recent video about this in which he says, look, some people just don't really want to do much with their lives. It's just not their thing. Some people don't need to go to university. They'll never care about philosophy. They'll never care about literature. And why waste the social resources and their time and our time, trying to push them where they don't really want to go. Resources should be put to where those who are actually doing things are going. Beyond that, your own development is your own deal. And I don't know if that's just going on tangents now. So, any other questions? Uh, zoom in on Doug. Well, let me see where he is. Well, he was around here a couple minutes ago. Hey, get out of the street. Hey, come here. Well, he's walking around. Can a part of the system see the direction the whole system is moving towards with reason alone? Yeah, but that doesn't really do much. Are there some limitations for reason? Hey, stop being a bad boy. All right, sorry. There's your zoom in on the dog. In the context of financial bubbles, for example, with bubbles, if you're asking, can anybody like be looking at the entire system and know specifically what things are going to be happening? The answer is no. But we can see the general necessities of what kinds of things are going to be happening. And the answer is yes. We do it all the time. Marx, for example, predicts the entire like flow and of the boom and bust of capitalism with logical precision. And we all can see that things are certainly coming of a certain type. But we can't predict the exact day. We can't predict exactly where things are going to be happening. But can we get the directions right? Yeah, I think we can get the directions right generally. I don't think that's specifically very useful, by the way, though. I think that part of the whole issue of the reality of things is that there's always contingencies, there are always externalities, and as such, we're always going to be caught with far more on our plates than we can actually become aware of. So there will always be things outside of capacity to recollect. So in that specific detailed sense, no, we don't have that kind of knowledge. Zul says, is untruth evil then? No. There is no untruth in Hegelianism. There's just more or less truth. What is knowledge? Knowledge is knowing of knowing. Knowledge is knowledge of the self. He wants to get inside the car. I don't know Japanese. Neither do I. My weep phase ended pretty quickly somewhere in like 11th grade in high school. That's at the peak of where I was into anime. And beyond that, never cared. Am I a Russian bot? No. I wish I was paid. I mean, I totally would. Especially, like you look at RT for example. Russia Today News. Uh, they get paid to tell the truth. I mean, it's funny. Like you're in the service of Russia for telling the truth about the U.S. It's not. It's not something I would be guilty of. Or rather, I would feel guilty about. Maybe I would be guilty, but I definitely wouldn't feel it. Soros and Putin. Yeah, that's quite a dialectic right there. Somebody mentioned Socrates earlier. I love the apology. Like Socrates is there just savage. I mean, it's awesome. Just calls it as he sees it. Look at him. He just wants to. He's just staring at me, and he's like, "I want to go home." All right, going on an hour and a half. Any other questions? Anybody? Am I looking forward to the Jordan Peterson debate with Zizek? Not really, honestly. Uh, I think people are going to make a bigger deal about it than it really is. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, Gigi," everybody's like, the people who are like anti Peterson want to see it because like, "Oh my God, she's gonna wipe the floor with him," and it's like, no problem, no contest, and they just want to see how bad it is. And then obviously other people who like Peterson are excited for it because they're like, "Oh my God, like imagine if Peterson wins against a philosopher, first academic who actually seems to challenge him." And my view is like Peterson wins no matter fucking what because almost nobody understands Zizek, and Zizek has a way of like not really liking debate. Like I've noticed that like Zizek doesn't really like to debate with people. Like he tries to be kind of nice to them and then try to subvert them from within. But people are literally too stupid to see that subversion, and so it never works. So people tend to think that Zizek ends up agreeing with the people he's actually disagreeing with. And so, and then there's always just like the other people who are just fans of Peterson, in which they wouldn't understand if Peterson lost anyway. There's the whole thing people say like, oh well, he's always claiming out of context and misunderstandings and whatnot. Uh, so it'll be a train wreck. So it'll be a train wreck. But I'll watch it definitely. And if there's anything to be that's worth making a comment about, I'll comment on it. Any other questions? We've been going on for an hour and a half, so might be time to wrap it up. Unless somebody else has something other interesting things to ask about or comment. Seems that Bo Jr. has nothing to say. So, all right. That was some all right bants. Uh, what do I do for a living? I do menial manual labor. Uh, and I'm not bothered by it. I actually like it. I much prefer this than like working as a fucking office monkey. Which is what everybody else wants to do. Everybody's like, "Oh, don't you want to work in an office? It's so much more comfortable." And all the things I hear about office work is nightmarish and hellish. And like the last place I worked at, I was a pretty small place, and so I wasn't too far from the office. But like all I know about the office politics, it was only four people there. I mean, literally the secretary, the branch manager, the sub manager, the shift leads, and they just couldn't get along. I mean, it was a whole lot of just drama for no fucking things. And it's not even like, oh wow, they're swamped with work. No, most of the time they weren't doing fuck all, and yet they still found time for drama. And so I don't like that. If you're doing manual labor, I literally get to zone out. Like my body's doing something. I don't have to wonder, wow, is my, like other people, who was it that came up with that whole thing? It was famous for a bit. I think, was it Graeber? I think it was Graeber who talked about bullshit jobs. That, quite a lot of people, who work cushy jobs, nonetheless live very depressed and stressed out lives because they don't even know how their work is meaningful in society. I work out here in the fields or in a packing house or in a warehouse. I know how my labor is worthwhile to society. I don't have to question that. And so I feel good about doing something real as opposed to somebody who's just shifting around papers or numbers and, has to wonder, like, what does this actually serve? Uh, so, yeah, you get to zone out. Your body does something good. You get to work out. And I literally just think all day because I don't have to focus on what I'm doing because I can just zone out. And so I'm just a lowly everyday worker. And you know what? I think that's actually better for my thought because I think Spinoza was right when Spinoza said that, philosophers should have an actual job besides fucking philosophizing. Like, I mean, that doesn't even fucking make sense, man. Like, philosophers, academic philosophers, what kind of job is philosophizing? I mean, you're teaching fucking kids, and most of the time, the philosophers don't do anything. Like, they don't teach. They have fucking like grad students teaching their fucking classes, and it's people who don't even want to be there and people who aren't interested. I mean, Chad from the Chad African channel has a ton of videos just talking about the reality of academic life in the humanities and how utterly disappointing and disgusting it is. And and it makes me glad for my decision to not continue on with academia. Daniel Rosser asks, how do we deal with flat earthers? Don't give them publicity. uh, I mean, until you actually like send somebody out like in space, like these people are just not going to believe it. I mean, oh my god, did we upload that? Hyperion, did we upload that to like Left of Wreckage? Because I know we did a recording, right, about flat Earth. Actually, I don't think we uploaded that. Yeah, I think we made a video on the flat Earth. We watched that moron. What's his name? Washed up, former YouTube fame. I can't remember his name. Yeah, it was the Sean Dawson video. Yeah, maybe we didn't really like upload it. I uploaded it to the my Mixcloud, I think, but I never uploaded it as a video. And so, I mean, you look at that kind of stuff. You look at that moronic friend of Joe Rogan. I forget what his name is, like Eddie something. Yeah, Shane Dawson. Eddie something, and that guy also believes in the flat Earth, and like these people just are beyond stupid. Like there is no argument to be had with them. Yeah, Eddie Bravo. Like there's no argument to be had with them. Like they don't accept facts. They don't, and I mean, actually, that's not too bad because like facts, unfortunately, the way science works nowadays has become so full of disingenuous shit that people are even. I think people are justified in becoming skeptical about everything. Uh, what they're not justified in is making their bullshit conclusions. Best The best argument I heard about the flat Earth was from an episode years and years ago by oh god, what's his name? He's famous. Art Bell. Art Bell's short-lived show Dark Matters, and he actually had an interview with this guy who was uh, a former financier worker who got really into like the flat Earth thing. Uh, and this guy actually had some legitimate arguments that if you do not know very much, easily trip you up and you are caught off guard. You can't answer them. He had an answer just for about everything, and he had talked to a bunch of people, within the relevant fields, and he had actually legitimate concerns about their answers. But the one thing he had to admit that he couldn't explain away was, well, why do ships disappear across over the horizon if the Earth is flat? And that was the gotcha. That was the gotcha that Art Bell finally could argue something on, because everything else, this guy had a pretty solid argument against, not for the flat Earth, but simply for not taking for granted what we normally believe. Uh, for anybody tuning in, ask anything, comment anything. Dragon says, I'm a 65,000-year-old sphinxer. Well, supposedly, according to Robert Schoch, the Sphinx is probably around like 32,000 years or something. Asked them about what they would think that could disprove the flat Earth. Well, they don't think it could be disproved. I mean, they have assumptions. These people. I've nearly gone mad trying to theorize flat Earth in my head that includes all the facts we know. You're probably going about it the wrong way. Actually, it's not about the facts we know. It's about the facts that we don't know. Once you get rid of the false certainty of a lot of the facts we do know, that's where these people get much of their theoretical strength. It's not in what we do know; it's what we don't know. And in what we don't know, they suddenly put in a lot of bullshit, ad hoc bullshit, just to fill in their beliefs. Somebody asked, does the Wolf in your name have to do with Virginia Woolf? No. Has to do with a nickname of mine from high school. Uh, so they believe the sun rotates around the earth. Uh, some of them do. Like, there's not one single flat earth theory, by the way. There's actually a nuance between flat earthers, between various different takes on the theory. So it depends on which flat earther you're arguing against. Because some of them go from like people who strike you as, huh, okay, they're not insane Bible thumpers or like six or young earthers or whatever. Um, and then you also go to the other extreme where like people talk about the firmament and the heavens, and they believe that the moon is actually within the Earth's atmosphere and is actually just like an inflated balloon or something, and that the sun is just like a giant light bulb or whatever. Shit gets weird, man. Why wolf? Because somewhere about 10th grade in high school, uh, I had longer hair than this. It was not fully long, but it was somewhere like like around here in length, and it was like pretty like unkempt and shaggy. And it was a day after the Super Bowl that year, and the Seahawks were playing against somebody else. I forget who. Um, but I had a Seahawks sweatshirt, even though I don't give a shit about football. But I had one, and I wore it to school. And my friends then started joking about Seawolf, because of my shaggy hair was like, they thought wolf, and then like Seahawks, Seawolf. So that's why. How ironic would it be that the fourth dimension folds the secret to why the Earth is flat? Um, I don't think that would work, Lime Boy. If the higher dimensions hide anything, it wouldn't be a flat dimension. The only flatness you can probably conceive out of that is how it's the whole typical thing you see supposedly about wormholes, where you have like two spaces that fold on each other and like pinch and meet. Um, that's a sort of flatness people talk about, to the flatness of space. They talk about how our three-dimensional space is relatively flat, and that's how we know that expansion, will go on forever. Blah blah blah. Dark energy stuff. What does Hegel mean when he says something is reflected into itself? Okay, here it goes. Existence exists. Boom. That's what inner reflection means. Literally. You know how like you would take a mirror, and you reflected a mirror into a mirror. Why is this thing not focusing? Stupid camera. If you looked into a mirror and you saw a mirror within the mirror, that's an inner reflection. That's it. I mean, it's when you say something like existence exists, that's an inner reflection. The thing in itself, being within being, that's an inner reflection. All inner reflections have this structure. Negation of negation, inner reflection. There you go. Is that clear? Ernest Manning says, so life is all moments. You got to clarify what you're asking there. Um, so what would be if negation is reflected into itself? It would be the negation of negation. It would be what you would call sublation in Hegelianism. It would be the positive. So negation of negation is the inner reflection of negation, and when you have that, you have the positive. What conspiracy theories do you buy into? 9/11 was an inside job. You're not going to convince me otherwise. Too much shitty things. Uh, Also, the whole deep state thing. Sure. I mean, I don't even know why that's called a conspiracy theory. I mean, that's true. That's fact. uh, Adam Tidor, why does he call it inner? Uh, because it's within it. If negation is a negation, it's a negation of negation. The proper way to see this is the concept of the other in the science of logic. To be other is to be the other of the other. And that's just exactly what it is to be other. So the content of the other is the other. Uh, oh, yeah, JFK was assassinated for various reasons by the deep state. That's not a conspiracy, that's just the truth. Anybody who looks into this knows it uh, without question. Now, the weird thing that if you want to talk about conspiracy theories there with JFK is the question of why did JFK get whacked? Uh, and those are various reasons to do with weird things. There's a lot of, and it's a lot of circumstance to that in which it's just weird things. For example, some people claim that it had something to do with UFO secrecy, that JFK had said too many things to too many people about it. For example, there's some theories that Marilyn Monroe got whacked because of that she was threatening to say something about those things, because of her love sessions with JFK. What does it mean for a concept to be posited? Uh, to be posited is what Daniel Rosser says there, that it is what it is internally. Things are posited as they constantly develop. So, the other is posited as the other of the other. And positing here is the explicit uh, appearance of a thing through another. Things are posited through another or by another. So the other is posited by the other. Something is posited by the other of the other. It's things as they explicitly develop. And Hegel says positing is not something that's explicit for itself as real positing until you get to the logic of essence, where things are explicitly within things put forth by those things. I mean, positing literally is like to put forth. You posit something, you put something in a place. Why do I believe in 9/11 is an inside job? I don't know, man. There's various reasons for that beyond all the weird shit that happened around it. I mean, I can't say it all the top of my head. The facts that there were, what was it, CIA plans for something like 9/11. What was that Operation Northwood? I think that was called. And sure, it was like from 40 years prior, but the fact that they even conceived such things, the fact that they were talking about it in their secret memos to themselves, that boy, wouldn't it be convenient if we just had another thing uh, like the Gulf of Tonkin, or rather, better yet, a Pearl Harbor, so that we can get all this other shit that we want to do done. And less than a year later, 9/11 happens. Uh, all the convenient things about how regular operations between the secret agencies, as well as just the national security apparatus, were suspended in curious ways, so that the people who orchestrate 9/11 managed to orchestrate it at all. And then there's the other crap about, uh, you know, how did this how does this really happen? With the people they tried to blame for what happened. There's a lot of weird inconsistencies along that way, and they're bizarre. They defy your normal notions of how is this even possible, just physics wise. Josh says it doesn't really matter whether or not it was an inside job. Um, yeah, for the general gist of the future of history, it doesn't matter whether it was, they got what they wanted. It does matter, if you care about revealing this stuff and, cleaning out the state, whether you actually will. We all know that's not very likely. Beyond a revolution, this shit isn't going to come out. And it's it's even doubtful that they would even keep this shit on record. It's probably the kind of stuff you work through and you burn as soon as you can. Any other questions? How does the small logic differ from the big one? Well, the science of logic has way more detailed arguments about what's happening. Did he think that suddenly he had some new insights? And Winfield compares both versions, and he says, we should take the science of logic's version for what it really is. That the lesser logic version cuts out some things for the sake of presentation, but logically you need the stuff in the science of logic. All right. Anything else? Well, it seems like no. Well, we managed to go on for 2 hours with a lot of rambling. I'll see if I do this at some other point again. Either way, it was interesting. It was